It was August 16, 2026, and the city wore the rain like a guilty overcoat. Midnight had come and gone, but the routers kept blinking in dark closets, cell towers kept whispering across wet rooftops, and every web panel left open to the street looked like a lit window in a bad part of town. Tonight's docket was heavy. 4 armed robberies, each one carrying a CVSS score of 729, not murders, not quite, but the kind of job where a crook walks in with command injection in his coat pocket and leaves with a shell, a foothold, and maybe the keys to the whole joint. The informant's tip, the EPSS, was low on paper, 2 or 3%. But low probability does not mean harmless. It only means the rain has not brought the wrong man to your door yet. The first case was CVE 2026-19036, an armed robbery in the Baicel's EG 1000-2000-7071, an armed robbery in the Baicel EG 1000-2025. Point 1025. EPSS 3.0%. Not in the KEV ledger, so this perp is not yet a repeat offender caught in the act. But the weapon was familiar. OS command injection, most likely CVE-78, improper neutralization of special elements used in an OS command. The LucyI web interface, reached through CG-bin-Lucy, takes user-controlled arguments named max hops, timeout, and size. An attacker sends a crafted HTTP request to that LucyI endpoint, placing shell metacharacters or command separators inside one of those fields. The web interface hands the value to a back-end command, likely for a diagnostic utility such as ping or traceroute. The input is not safely quoted, validated, or separated from the command line. The operating system reads the extra text as a new command. That is when the door opens. The affected target named in the file is Baicel's EG-366-1M with firmware Baicel EG-361M with firmware Baicel EG-6T20.52025. I do not have a broader confirmed affected range beyond that version, so treat that build as confirmed vulnerable and adjacent firmware as suspect until the vendor says otherwise. Baicel's equipment shows up in fixed wireless and private LTE deployments, often at the edge of provider or enterprise networks. That makes this more than a dusty router problem. A successful attacker may gain command execution on the device with the privileges of the web process, and on embedded gear that can mean control of routing, traffic capture, configuration theft, persistence, or a pivot deeper into management networks. The attack is remote. The advisory does not clearly state whether authentication is required. If the LucyI interface is reachable from the internet or an untrusted management segment, assume the risk is live. Sysadmins and network teams should remove public access to CG-bin-Lucy and place the management interface behind a VPN, jump host, or dedicated management VLAN. If Baicel publishes a corrected firmware newer than Baicel EBQC2.105.25.25, upgrade to that fixed release or later. As of this report, no exact patched version is identified in the intelligence provided, so asset owners should open a vendor case and monitor Baicel's advisories. Short of a patch, disable vulnerable diagnostic features if the interface allows it, restrict source IP addresses, and use firewall rules to block untrusted traffic to the web panel. Detection belongs to security operations and network defenders. Look in web logs for CCG-bin-Lucy requests carrying max hops, timeout, or size values with characters such as semicolon, backtick, dollar parenthesis, pipe, ampersand, encoded new line, WG, tac, curl, shesh, busybox, or NC. On the device, hunt for unexpected child processes spawned by the web server and outbound connections to strange hosts. But that was not the only body on the slab tonight. The next file was CVE-2026-19036, another armed robbery, this time in Shibby Tomato 128-20-00000, CVSS 720, EPSS 220%. No KEV entry, but the exploit is public, and that gives every cheap hood in the alley a map to the till. The flaw sits in the handling of PPP custom, tied to function sub 40F88C, and the file ATM-PPP1 options. Again, the technical break is OS command injection, CVE-78. The attacker sends a remote request that influences PPP-WAN configuration, placing crafted shell content into the PPP-1 option. The firmware writes or processes that argument into TTM-PPPP1 options. A script or service then consumes that file while bringing up or configuring PPP. Because the value is not properly constrained or escaped, the shell interprets attacker-supplied text. The confirmed affected version is Shibby Tomato 1.282000. Shibby Tomato is a community router firmware used on consumer and small office routers, especially older Broadcom-based models. It may not have enterprise market share, but it lives in the kinds of places attackers love: home offices, small shops, remote worker networks, and forgotten branch gear. If exploited, an attacker can execute commands on the router. That can lead to DNS hijacking, credential interception, VPN tampering, packet capture, botnet enrollment, or lateral movement into machines behind the router. The attack is described as remote, and the public exploit raises the heat. Authentication requirements are not clear from the report, so defenders should assume any exposed administrative interface is dangerous. There is no exact patched Shibby Tomato version named in the supplied intelligence. Shibby Tomato 128.20.00000 is old, and many deployments should be considered end of life. The safest remediation is migration to maintained firmware, such as Fresh Tomato, OpenRART, vendor-supported firmware, or replacement hardware, after confirming the chosen release is not affected by the same PP custom handling flaw. Network teams should immediately block WAN site administration, disable remote management, and restrict router admin access to trusted internal hosts. DevOps and remote access teams should check whether these routers support Office VPN or PPP links in planned maintenance. Detection means reviewing administrative logs for changes to PPP, WAN, or custom script fields. Hunt for suspicious values in PPP custom or WAN options containing shell separators, download commands, reverse shell strings, or encoded payloads. If you see the router reaching out to unknown IP addresses after a WAN config change, treat it like footprints in wet cement. I barely had time to light another cigarette when the next file landed on my desk. CVE-2026-19035 was the same neighborhood, same weather, different alley. Shibby Tomato 128.20.00000.2. EPSS 220%. Not in KEV, but public exploit code is out there, and public exploit code has a way of turning quiet streets into crime scenes. This time the function is new quaslimit start in tet-c quaslimit, and the argument is new quaslimit tenable. The vulnerability is OS command injection, CVE-78. The attack chain starts with a remote request that changes or submits quality of service limit settings. The attacker places command syntax into new quaslimit tenable. The firmware passes that value into the QS limit start routine. That routine builds or runs shell commands without strict validation. The shell executes the injected payload as though it belonged there. The affected version is Shibby Tomato 128.20.00000, confirmed. The feature involved, CoS limiting, is common on small routers because users want bandwidth control for phones, cameras, and work machines. That makes the vulnerable code path plausible in real life, not some locked filing cabinet nobody opens. An attacker who reaches the administrative web surface or any exposed interface that can trigger CoS configuration may gain command execution. From there, the router can be turned into a surveillance post. It can alter traffic flow, poison DNS, add firewall rules, stage malware, or serve as a quiet stepping stone into internal machines. The report says remote initiation is possible. It does not prove whether login is needed, so exposed management remains the main condition to eliminate. Remediation follows the same hard truth. No exact patched version is listed for Shibby Tomato 1.28.20.000 in the provided report. Replace or upgrade away from Shibby Tomato builds that include this vulnerable QS code. If a maintained fork publishes a correction, upgrade to that corrected release or later after validation. Until then, disable QS limit features if possible, remove remote administration from the WAN, isolate management access, and require strong credentials even on local admin panels. Security teams should add detection for HTTP requests that modify QS settings and include suspicious strings in new quaslimit enable. Look for semicolon, pipe, backtick, $, chmod, telnet d, nc, wgd box. On routers, check for unexpected changes in init scripts, cron jobs, firewall rules, DNS settings, and newly opened listening ports. The night was far from over. The fourth case, CVE 2026-19034, rounded out the Shibby Tomato run like the last man out of a getaway car. Shibby Tomato 12820000000, CVSS 72 EPSS 220%. No KEV listing, but the exploit has been made public. The vulnerable function is new quaslimit stop tied to TMP quaslimit stop.esh, and the dangerous argument is wanyface. Once more, the charge is OS command injection, CVE-78. The attacker sends a crafted remote request that manipulates the WAN interface value used when stopping QSLinit behavior. The firmware writes or invokes STMP quaslimit behavior, DEsh, with wanyface inserted into a shell command. The confirmed affected range is Shibby Tomato 1.282000. No wider range is proven here, but shared code often travels across builds, forks, and router models, so defenders should not get sentimental. The impact is command execution on an edge device. If the web process or script runs with elevated privilege, the attacker may gain full control of the router. In real attacks, that means changing DNS to harvest logins, redirecting banking or SaaS traffic, spying on unencrypted sessions, installing persistence, or using the router as a beachhead for ransomware operators looking for soft internal targets. The exploit is remote. Authentication and configuration conditions are not fully stated, so the practical defense is to make sure untrusted users cannot reach the administrative surface at all. There is no exact fixed Shibby Tomato release named in today's intelligence. Sysadmins, small business IT staff, and anyone responsible for remote office gear should inventory Tomato-based routers and retire Shibby Tomato 128.20.000 where found. If replacement cannot happen tonight, disable remote admin, restrict web administration to a trusted management subnet, turn off COS limit features, and monitor configuration drift. Developers maintaining router firmware should audit every shell call that touches interface names, PPP fields, and COS values. Use allow lists for interface names, avoid shell invocation where possible, pass. Detection should focus on requests or config entries involving wanyface and quaslimit stop.esh watch. Watch for injected payload markers, new files under TMP, strange outbound traffic, and router process trees where web or config daemons spawn shells. 4 cases, 1 theme. Edge devices are lonely sentries, and lonely sentries get bribed. Command injection on a router is not just a bug in a box, it is a way to bend the road every packet travels. Tonight's EPSS tips were 3.0F% and 2.04 from a nervous informant, but public exploit code and exposed management panels can turn modest into messy before dawn. So here is the work. Find Baicel's EG3661M on ByCEG362404.5.3AT2423N0. Find Shibby Tomato 1248230. Remove internet exposure. Patch where a fixed release exists. Where no exact patched version is known, replace, isolate, or disable the vulnerable feature. Then read the logs like a detective reads a ransom note. Look for the command separators, the download tools, the sudden outbound call in the rain. This is Jack Cipher, signing off. Keep your admin panels out of the streetlight, and never trust a field that can talk to a shell.